So, on this episode of Growing Up in Queens, New York, we're going to talk about many things, and it's going to be going in 10 different places. So, when I was 18, my first car was a 1985 Pontiac Grand Prix. It was white. It had spoke wheels. Well, I ended up getting rims later on. And yeah, really nice racing rims. And I jacked up the tires in the back. So they were actually bigger and higher in the back. So the rear of the car was actually, oh my God. I hope you made it home okay. You were brave to go out alone. Oh, yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. I get YouTube notifications. And so pretty much the ass of the car, picture this, was higher up in the back than the front. This car was my pride and joy. It cost me $5,000. And this was in, I think it was 1992 or 1993, something like that. Okay. And so $5,000 back then was a hell of a lot of money. How did I get that money? I worked really hard. I had 2 jobs to pay for this damn car that, by the way, broke down every single other week. The first week I had it, the tranny blew. Yes, no, not transvestite. The transmission blew. And I was crying. I mean, crying because I finally got myself a car and the fucking transmission blew. I was on Francis Lewis Boulevard in Whitestone. And what we used to do back then was called cruising the boulevard. And what we would do was we were stupid. We were dumbass kids. We would just drive up and down, up and down. It was like a 3 or 4 or 5 mile stretch in this particular area. I was a guidette. What's a guidette? A guidette is someone with big hair. Picture Snooki, okay, from Jersey Shore. So I would be cruising down the boulevard over and over and over and over and over again all night long until I kept having to fill up the damn gas tank. And because I was picking up guys. That's how you used to pick up guys back then. It wasn't on dating apps. You would just cruise the boulevard. And you would actually, they had it in parts of Brooklyn too, called 86th Street. You would cruise up and down 86th Street also. That was another fun place to pick up guys. And so you would be cruising up and down Franny Lou. We called it Franny Lou. And a guy would like pull up at the light next to you, and you'd be with a whole crew of your friends, and they would be like, pull over. And everyone would pull over on the side of the road and just bullshit and exchange numbers. That's how you met guys back then. But back to my story of growing up in Queens, New York City. So this car was my pride and joy. And I look at it now and it's ugly as fuck. And this looked exactly like my car, except for later on, I told you I jacked up the back end to make it like look like a racing car. And I had really nice rims. I think were they 5-star rims? I think that's what they called them. And the windows were tinted, but when I say tinted, they were black. And I don't see it on this car, but it had something called T-tops. And it was a removable glass panel that was in the roof of your car. And it was the coolest fucking thing ever. But you had to use a key to unlock it. And it was a big, heavy, monstrous thing. And you had to take it out and put it in your back seat or your trunk just to drive around like that. And let's just say, oh, Jesus, go away, you fucker. And so let's just say I didn't take it off very often because I was lazy. And what else did I have? I had, let's find it. I had everybody had to have one of these. If you didn't have one of these in your car, you sucked. You were not cool and your life completely sucked. And what was it? It was called an Alpine system. And it was called a Benzie box. And I spelt it wrong in my search, I noticed. Let's spell it correctly. And maybe I could find the exact model I had. But pretty much, if you look at this, you would pull out your stereo or your radio from the actual dash, and it had a handle that would fold out. And I think this is the same one I had. It looks identical. And so you brought it inside the house with you at night. Why? Because there was car radio thieves all over the damn place. And so if you didn't take it in with you, the next morning you would go out to your car and your radio would be gone. And it totally sucked. And so, yeah, I'll show you. I found a video of some guy like doing a parody about what it was like back then. And let's just take a look. This is not an Alpine system, I don't think. Where is he walking around with it? God damn it. Oh, here. Oh, fuck. I can never do this shit right. Yeah, okay. This is how big this fucker was. Okay, because you can imagine now having to pull that out every single night out of your car dash and drag that into the house with you when you had a bunch of bullshit to bring in was a pain in the ass. So the one night, yes, I did it every night. I took my Benzie box, my Alpine system in the house with me every single night because I would die without it. Let's just put it that. I had that shit booming with the bass, if you know what I mean. And you couldn't cruise up and down Franny Lou or Francis Lewis Boulevard in Queens without having your system like the bass thumping. Otherwise, you were a fucking nerd. And so, okay, so I took the Benzie box in every single night. The one day I get lazy, I was like, I don't feel like taking this fucking thing in. It weighs like 10 pounds. I'll just stick it. I came home from work. By the way, I used to work 2 jobs to pay for this car that was an absolute, utter piece of shit. Let's take some more views of it. Mine looked way better than this one. I'm not going to lie. Mine was really souped up. And yeah. And so I stuck it under the seat. The one time, oh, I think it does have T-tops. The one time I decided to stick it under the damn seat, guess what happened? By the way, this car was luxury, although it kept breaking down. It was like 8 years old. It had like 150,000 miles on it, and I still paid $5,000 for the fucker. And so I come out the next morning to go into work, and what do I see? A gaping hole in the dashboard where my Alpine system should have been. And then I remembered, oh, I put it under the seat. That's right. And I stuck my hands under the driver's seat, and I'm feeling around and I'm like, where's my Alpine? Where's my Alpine system? And my Alpine system was gone. And then I noticed the passenger side door was ajar. And I said, fuck my life. I went into work crying. I was crying because I was stuck with my own thoughts. Do you know what it's like to actually drive around in a car when you have anxiety disorder and you can't distract yourself from your disastrous thoughts? Well, it was like being in hell. Okay. It was in the 7 portals of hell. So I told my dad about it. I was crying. He's like, well, you can't even bother doing a police report. They ain't going to bother. It's a fucking radio. They don't care. And I was like, Dad, help me. You got to help me. I can't live without my Alpine. And so he said, well, how much is an Alpine? And I think back then it was like $800. And he's like, I'm not loaning you $800. And so I ended up with a fucking JBL. And it was like a $200 JBL faceplate that would pop out instead of the whole damn chassis being pulled out of the dash. Okay, so you know where I'm going here. Pretty much going in a circle of like absurdity and not making any points. Okay, so about a week later, in the middle of the night, I wanted to kill this man, by the way, whoever, and it had to be a man, right? Because women don't go around stealing car stereos or radios or Alpine systems. And so in my mind, I was like, this motherfucker, whoever took my radio, I hope they burn in fucking hell. And I was like, I hope karma gets them. And then I was like, there's no such thing as fucking karma. This guy just sold my Benzie system, my Benzie box, to some dude off the fucking street. He probably got $100 for it and scored some crack. And I was pissed. And so about a week later, in the middle of the night, now I always used to have nightmares after this. After I got my shitty JBL. No, it wasn't a JBL. It was a Pioneer. That's what it was. A Pioneer removable faceplate radio. And it sucked. It didn't have the booming bass like the Alpine. And so I was thinking to myself, this motherfucker, I hope he dies. And every night I would have these dreams, these reoccurring nightmares. And in the dream, somebody would be stealing my car stereo. And I would jump up out of my sleep, gasping for air and feeling like I was dying and I couldn't breathe and I felt like I was suffocating. And I'd run from my room to the front window just to make sure that my car was okay and nobody broke into it again. And so here comes a week later, I hear screams, like absolute screams. I was always hyper vigilant. Most of my neighbors didn't hear shit. I always heard everything, except for the night they stole my Alpine. And so I'm laying in bed, I hear screaming, and I grabbed a baseball bat that was always leaning up next to the front door. Yes, if you grew up in the 80s, the 70s, 80s, and 90s in Queens, New York, or Brooklyn, you always had a baseball bat propped up against the front door. Why? Because there was always people trying to steal your shit. And so I ran out with the baseball bat, and I see my Irish neighbor. He was about 5'4", but he was like, picture like the Fighting Irish, the leprechaun dude. He was like that. And I see a guy on the ground, and I see him smashing a baseball bat over his head while the guy's screaming and pleading for his life. He's like, please, please let me go. Let me go. Oh my God. Ah. And he was screaming, and I was laughing. I don't know what was wrong with me, because I knew right then and there that was the motherfucker that stole my Alpine. And so I saw my neighbor bashing his goddamn brains in. And I saw blood flying out everywhere. It's like those CSI shows where you see blood splatter on the wall, and it was flying everywhere. It was all over my neighbor's wife beater shirt, which is like a white tank top that like men used to wear, and we called them wife beaters. Well, this my neighbor was definitely not a wife beater, but he was a thief beater, and he was beating the shit out of him with the baseball bat, smashing it over his shins, his legs, his cranium, and his head started bleeding, and the guy was screaming, and he sort of like busted open his head. And what did I do? Instead of running in the house and calling the cops, I was enjoying every minute of it. And I said to my neighbor, can I borrow the bat just for 1 second? Because at this point I had thrown my bat down, and it was like 5 feet or 10 feet away from me. And he handed me the bat, and I got a few whacks in, and it felt glorious. It felt fucking glorious. And so the guy was like severely handicapped at this point. And I looked at my neighbor, and he looked at me, and we both had that knowing look, because you didn't call the cops back then. You just didn't. You just took matters into your own hand. And so he looked at me, I looked at him. The guy was hysterical, crying, covered in blood, and he was dripping. He must have lost several pints. And my neighbor let the guy get up, and the guy was crawling away, actually crawling away. And I was laughing my fucking ass off. And I went into the house, and I went back to bed, and I never had another nightmare again. Thanks for watching. See you all soon.